Under the olive tree knits, adding beads to a picot bind off. In this tutorial I'm going to show you how to add beads to the picot bind off as seen here in the Beauty of the Rain shawl. So what's nice about this pattern is that it uses beads throughout the lace, so when it comes to binding off the shawl you can also add a bead to that very final row, so you have beads that sit right at the bottom of the shawl, all along the bottom edge. So my bead and yarn colour here are very similar, so apologies if you can't see this too well, but on row 113 you place beads in the centre of each of the diamond shapes as you go across the row. Then for the next two beaded rows you place beads in every other one. So you place a bead, you miss the next diamond shape, you'd place a bead, and that follows in the next row, and then that patterning also continues in the bind off, so you end up putting a bead at the bottom of one of the diamond shapes, missing the next, putting one in the next, and so on. But if you want to, of course, you can add a bead to the bottom of every picot diamond as you bind off. I'll show you both ways. I'll show you how to work the bind off without the bead and with the bead. This swatch follows the same pattern as the main shawl, and you can see the bead patterning. I probably should have used higher contrast beads again, apologies for that, but you can see here the diamond shapes in the lace, and there's a bead here, there's no bead in the next one, bead in the next one, and so on. So as you work the bind off, you'll see that the final row of the lace has formed the top half of the next row of diamonds. These shapes provide us with a really good reference point when it comes to working the bind off, as you can use the bottom of the diamonds on the previous row. There's some double decrease stitches there that form the point, and there's 5 stitches in between those double decreases, and this is where we're going to be working our picot bind off. We'll also be continuing that alternate bead placement as we work the bind off, so following the same pattern as we've established in the previous beaded rows. So to add the beads you'll just need a small crochet hook and some beads, and I'm using a different colour bead for the bind off so you can see the colour more clearly. So we're going to start the bind off by knitting the first 2 stitches together through the back loop. So knit those together and then slip the single stitch back to the left hand needle purlwise. So that's 1 stitch bound off. So now we're going to do this 6 more times. So knit the next 2 stitches together through the back loop and then just transfer that single stitch back to the left hand needle purlwise. So for this pattern you'll be knitting 2 together through the back loops 7 times. But before you transfer that final stitch back to the left hand needle, a good way to double check that you're in the right point is, as mentioned before, find that double decrease of the next diamond shape and then just count 3 stitches back, and that's where you want to be to start the picot bind off. So slip that stitch back to the left hand needle and then using a knitted cast on 3 stitches. So for our first picot bind off, we're not going to be adding a bead to this one as it doesn't follow in the patterning. So I'm going to show you how to work the bind off firstly without adding the bead. So all we do here is just bind off 3 stitches using a knitted bind off. So knit the first 2 stitches and then pass that first stitch over the second stitch and so on. Next, bring the yarn to the front to do a yarn over and knit the next 2 stitches together. You've now got 3 stitches on the right hand needle, so what we're going to do now is just pass the last 2 stitches on the right hand needle, so that's the yarn over and the last stitch from the bind off, and we're going to pass those over the knit 2 together stitch. Then just slip that remaining stitch back to the left hand needle. And that's our first picot done. So let's carry on, and this time we're going to add a bead to the next picot bind off. So as before, knit the next 2 stitches together through the back loop and then transfer that remaining stitch back to the left hand needle. And this time we're going to be doing that 4 times in total. And again, to double check we're in the right place, before you slip that last stitch back, just take a look at where the next double decrease is on the bottom of the next diamond, and then count 3 stitches back, and that's where you should be ready to start the next picot. And this is where we're going to be adding a bead to the bind off. So slip the stitch back to the left hand needle, and then using a knitted cast on 3 stitches. Now bind off just 1 stitch using a knitted bind off, so knit 2 stitches and then pass the first stitch over the second. Before we bind this next stitch off, this is where we're going to be adding our bead. So using your crochet hook, pick up a bead, pop that bead onto the next stitch, and then put the stitch back onto the left hand needle. Now we can continue with the bind off, so go ahead and bind off the next 2 stitches. And you can see there that that bead is now really nicely placed at the bottom of the picot. To finish the stitch, we're just going to bring the yarn to the front to do a yarn over and then knit the next 2 stitches together, and then take the last 2 stitches on the right hand needle, so that's a yarn over and the last stitch from the bind off, and just pass them over that knit 2 together stitch. Again, just transfer that single stitch back to the left hand needle, and now we're ready to knit 2 stitches together through the back loops again. And we're going to do this a total of 4 times. Again, use that next double decrease stitch and count 3 stitches back just to make sure you're in the right place to start the picot, and then we can work it exactly the same way as we did before. So we're just going to recap the whole process again, working the picot without the bead and with the bead. So start by casting on 3 stitches, then bind off 3, yarn over and knit 2 together, pass the last 2 stitches over the knit 2 together stitch. Transfer the single stitch back to the left hand needle, and then you're ready to start the knit 2 together through the back loops. So knit 2 together through the back loops, transfer the single stitch 4 times. Double check you're in the right place, slip the stitch back to the left hand needle and then cast on 3 stitches. Bind off 1 stitch. Add a bead to the next stitch. And then bind off the next 2 stitches. Yarn over and knit 2 together. And then pass the last 2 stitches over that knit 2 together stitch. And now you can just continue binding off the rest of the shawl in this way. So once you've finished your bind off, it should look a little something like this. So you can see here that you've got those lovely beads right at the edge of the bind off. So now I'm just going to give this a good block and I'll show you how to pin it out so you can really make the most of that lovely lace. So I've just soaked the swatch and I've pinned out the top so it's in a straight line. So now I'm going to show you how you can pin out the border. And you can already see what a difference blocking has made to that lace. It's really opened it out and it's looking beautiful. So I'm just going to take some T-pins, and as you pull the lace you'll see that there's a lovely big yarn over hole in the centre of each one. So just take your T-pin, pop it into that hole and then just pull the lace out. And as you pin it into place you'll see how that picot completes that half diamond that we started along the edge of the border. So I'm just going to carry on pinning out the lace like this. I like to pull the lace out as far as I can, really open up that pattern. Lace can take it and once it's dried it will stay in place. So that's the lace all pinned out, so I'm just going to leave that to dry now.